Jack stood at the landing platform with a bag in one hand and his ID badge hanging crooked on his chest, as the transport ship hissed and opened, and the warm red air of planet Virel spilled into the docking bay, like steam from a boiling pot, and, just like that, he was no longer on Earth, and no longer safe, and no longer sure what was normal. It was his first day at the joint alien human science post, and his mind was spinning from the new sights and smells and the strange way the air buzzed against his skin, as if tiny invisible sparks were brushing his arms and neck like whispers, and nerves danced through his body with each step he took toward the check-in desk. That was when he saw her. She was tall and silver blue like a statue, made from light and ice, and the way she moved was like water flowing over smooth stone with no break, no hurry. Just calm power and silence, and when she turned her eyes to Jack, something deep inside him forgot how to breathe. Her name was Rylesa, and her uniform marked her as a diplomat of her kind, and her face held no smile, but also no threat, only interest and purpose, and when she walked straight toward Jack, the world narrowed to her glowing eyes and the sound of her boots on metal. Before he could speak, or even blink, she leaned forward and kissed him full on the mouth. It was not a short kiss, and it was not gentle. It was warm and deep and wet and slow, and Jack's mind simply froze, like someone had yanked the power cable from his thoughts and replaced it with a fire that shot straight to his chest. His hands stayed still by his sides, but his heart raced like a storm, and her tongue touched his, and it felt like falling into something wide and endless and strange and beautiful. Then she pulled back with a simple nod and walked away without a word, as if she had only shaken his hand or said hello in a boring voice, and Jack stood there, stunned, lips still tingling, brain still melting, watching her go with wide eyes and silent questions. No one else reacted, no one gasped, no one laughed, no one even looked twice, and that made it worse. Somehow, like he was the only one who had felt something real in that moment, and the silence around him made it echo louder in his mind. The officer at the check-in desk finally cleared his throat and asked Jack for his ID, and Jack handed it over, without blinking, still watching the spot where Rylesa had vanished like smoke, and still feeling the soft heat of her kiss, like it was burned into his memory. He could not stop thinking about it, even as he moved into his new quarters, and unpacked his small bag, and tried to set up his schedule for the next day. His thoughts kept circling back to the kiss, like a bird that could not fly straight. He replayed it again and again, wondering if it meant something, wondering if it was a mistake, wondering if she would do it again if they met alone. The next day he saw her again in the long hallway near the lab, and she nodded to him like any coworker would, and moved past him with a calm grace, and he opened his mouth to say something, but no words came. Because what do you say to someone who kissed you without warning, and then acted like it never happened? Jack talked to another human staff member during lunch, and finally asked the question that had been burning in his brain. Is kissing normal for them? He said, trying to sound casual, but failing badly. The other man laughed and said, yes, that's just a greeting. For the Virelian class, they kiss to share breath and taste mood and energy. It's polite, like a handshake. Don't take it personal, man. They do it to everyone, but Jack did take it personal. Because she had looked right at him before the kiss, and there had been something there, something warm, something curious, something more than just greeting, and it clung to his thoughts like sticky dust. He watched her again that afternoon, and saw her kiss to others in passing, just quick, short greetings. And his chest hurt in a way he could not explain. He thought maybe he was foolish, maybe he was just lonely, maybe the stars made people dream too much, but still, he wanted to believe that the kiss she gave him was longer and deeper, and full of something she had not given to the others that night. He lay in bed with his hands behind his head, and his eyes opened wide, and the memory of the kiss burned behind his eyelids, like light through glass, and he whispered her name without knowing why. And outside his window, the moons of Virel drifted slowly across the sky like silent watchers, and Jack knew he was in trouble, because no matter what the others said, he could not believe that kiss had meant nothing. It had broken something inside him, and he was not sure he wanted it to heal. Jack woke up early, but not because of the alarm, because his dreams had been full of silver light and warm breath and soft skin, and a kiss that would not leave his thoughts no matter how many hours passed since it happened. He sat on the edge of the bed with his hands clenched together, and his heart beating faster than it should have for someone who had only been kissed once by someone who said nothing after, and looked away like it meant nothing, but it meant everything to him. He washed his face and stared into the mirror and saw confusion in his own eyes, and felt foolish, but still, the memory returned in flashes like a secret fire that warmed and burned at the same time. When he reached the lab, he tried to focus on the readings and numbers and data charts glowing on the screen, but all he saw was her reflection in the polished walls, and her scent in the air, and the way her eyes had looked just before the kiss, as if searching For something inside him, he told himself to stop thinking about her, but it never worked, and when Rylesa walked past the lab door, without even turning her head, something inside him fell hard, like a rock, into cold water. He walked out into the hallway and saw her talking to another alien officer, and then she leaned forward and kissed that officer just like she kissed him. Not as deep, not as slow, but still a kiss, and his chest grew tight, and his jaw clenched. Without thinking he walked away fast, and didn't look back later. In the lounge, Jack sat with one of the human mechanics, a man named Leo, who liked to talk about alien tools and food, and once wrestled a six-legged beast for fun, and Jack asked him straight out, "Do you think they feel anything when they kiss, or is it just custom like a bow or handshake?" Leo chuckled and said it depends on the alien. But most of them just see it as energy sharing or scent marking or greeting, nothing romantic unless they say it is, and even then, it's rare they bond different. Not like a stack nodded, but the answer gave him no peace, because the way Rylesa had held his gaze, the way her fingers brushed his wrist before she pulled away, the way his skin still remembered her breath, all of that told him it was more, or it could be more, if she allowed it. Days passed, and Jack avoided her on purpose, but also followed her path with his eyes. Every time she entered a room, as if his heart had grown sensors that tracked her shape and sound and smell. Even in silence, she seemed calm and distant, but sometimes her eyes flicked toward him just for a second, and then away, as if afraid to linger, or afraid not to. One night, the base held a gathering for shared harmony and music, played through soft glowing stones, and both humans and aliens danced, or sat and talked, and ate strange glowing fruit, and laughed under hanging lights. Jack did not want to go, but his supervisor forced him, and said it would look good if he mingled. So he stood near the edge and drank something that tasted like mint and fire, and waited for the night to end. Then she appeared from behind a curtain of vines and moonlight. And her dress was not like her usual robe, but softer and flowing with edges like liquid, and Jack's breath caught in his throat as she walked toward the platform and began to speak. Her voice was smooth like wind through hollow trees, and she spoke of connection and respect and balance between species, and her eyes passed over Jack once, and did not pause, but he felt it like lightning in his veins. After her speech, everyone clapped with small polite gestures, and she stepped down and passed close to him. And this time, she did not kiss anyone, not even the high officers, and Jack felt that gap like a wound. He turned to go, but her voice stopped him softly in the dark. "Jack." He froze and turned slowly, and saw her standing behind one of the light pillars half hidden in shadow. "You seem distant these days," she said, as if she didn't already know why, and her face looked unreadable but not unkind. He took a breath and said, "Maybe it's because you kissed me, like I meant something, and then walked away." "Like I didn't." Her eyes narrowed, but not in anger. And she stepped closer and looked up at him, and said, "We do not bond like humans do, and kisses are greetings for us." But still, she did not finish the sentence. "Still, what?" he asked. "Still, I think of you more than I should," she whispered, and then touched his arm gently, and walked away again, leaving him in the dark with his heart full of stars and silence. And Jack knew then that he was not alone in this, not anymore. The room was cold and wide, with blue crystal walls that pulsed with soft light, and around the round table sat 7 Varelian elders, their eyes sharp, their faces unreadable, their robes marked with glowing threads of rank and tradition. And Riley stood in the center of the circle, with her hands behind her back, and her voice still silent. She had been summoned at dawn, without warning, and told nothing, except that her actions were causing concern among the council, and now the silence around her felt louder than any storm, as the eldest among them finally spoke with a voice as dry as wind through dead trees. "You kissed the human again," and the others saw Rylesa blinked, but said nothing at first, then nodded once, and answered with calm. "I greeted him as I would greet any guest, but it was not just greeting," another elder said. Her kiss lasted longer. Her stance was closer, her breath was warmer, and the human's body language was affected. And now, the humans ask questions and whisper rumors, and the council hears them all. Rylesa raised her chin, and said, "I did what custom allows. Nothing more." "Then why is he looking at you like a bonded one?" The third voice asked, deep and curious and cold. "And why does he follow you with his eyes, and study our language in secret, and ask the machines about our ways, because he does not understand our ways?" She said softly, "Because his kind links mouth to love, and not to honor or energy. Like we do, and I have told him to stop, but have you stopped?" Filling asked, the oldest elder, leaning forward slightly, and for a moment there was no answer, just the hum of the wall crystals, and the slow breath of beings older than memory. Rylesa did not look away, and her voice was still when she said, "I do not know what I feel, but I do know he is not a danger, he is not a fool, and he is not weak. And that is what scares us most," said the elder, "because If he is not weak, and you are not certain, and the humans begin to believe there is meaning behind your kiss, then we may soon face a path we cannot undo. Meanwhile, Jack sat alone in the mess hall with cold food on his tray and nothing in his stomach, and his fingers tapped without rhythm as he tried again to forget what she had whispered to him days ago. I think of you more than I should. He had not seen her since that night under the moonlight fruit lights, and her absence pressed into his chest like a weight he could not move. He had tried to keep busy helping in the supply dock, repairing broken sensor nodes, even sorting strange alien mushrooms for research, but none of it cleared her from his mind. He watched the alien crews from afar, and saw how they kissed briefly at times, some on the mouth, some on the side of the neck, depending on cast and role and station, but none of them looked into each other the way she had looked into him. He went to the translator AI and asked it, in a quiet voice, what does a long kiss mean in Varelian diplomacy? The machine paused and answered, a long kiss is rare among non-bonded. It can suggest increased curiosity, desire for deeper energy sharing, or experimental connection. It is advised not to return a long kiss, unless invited. Jack stared at the words, and his hand trembled, and he turned off the screen. Later that night, he was called to the command chamber without warning, and found Rylesa standing near the edge of the glowing map table, her hands clasped tight, her face harder than he had ever seen. You must stop this, she said before he could speak. Stop asking questions, stop watching me, stop thinking about the kiss. But why? He asked. Why do you care if it meant nothing to you? Because it may not mean nothing to me, she said, but it must mean nothing now, because if it means more, then I lose the trust of my people, and you may lose much more. He stepped closer, but she stepped back. They think I am weak around you, she whispered. They think you will make me choose between peace and feeling, and if I choose wrong, they will take me from this station, and you from this world. Then, what do we do? He asked quietly. We survive, she said, and we forget. And then before she turned to leave, she kissed him again, just once, soft and short, and whispered, I wish we had met in a world where a kiss could mean only love. And then she walked out of the chamber, while Jack stood still, heart louder than thought, eyes burning with truth he did not want to accept. Because now he knew she felt something too, and that truth was the most dangerous thing of all. Exactly 800 words. Third-person style. Simple basic English. No full stops. Jack stood in front of the shuttle with his gear packed tight, and his boots dusty from the red wind that blew across the open field, and his heart beat faster than it should because Rylesa was there beside him, and this time, she did not kiss him, and did not even look at him, but her silence was louder than a scream. The command had chosen them for a joint mission to inspect a collapsed dome, far from the main base, and no one else had time, and no one else had clearance, and Jack had said yes before they even finished reading the orders. Because part of him still wanted to be near her, even if it meant silence and cold looks and danger. In a dead zone, the shuttle shook as it lifted off, and Jack tried to speak, but she stayed quiet, with her eyes on the glass, and her hands folded, and her whole body still like stone. And when he looked at her profile, it was like seeing a statue of someone he once loved and no longer knew. The flight was short and the landing rough, and the dome lay half buried in dust and broken steel like a dying beast with its ribs showing, and no one had entered in years, but the scanner said something was still running inside, and they had been sent to confirm and recover if possible. They entered through a cracked wall and moved slowly with flashlights and filtered breath, and Jack tried again to speak, but Rylesa only gave short replies, and focused on the task, and every step echoed like guilt in the silence between them. Inside the dome, the power flickered and strange lights blinked from damaged panels, and when they reached the core room, the floor gave way without warning, and both of them fell into darkness with dust in their mouths, and pain in their bones, and the sound of steel groaning above. They landed hard in a lower section, sealed from the outside, and Jack coughed and groaned and called out, and Rylesa answered with a quiet voice, I am not hurt, but I cannot see the exit. He lit a flare and saw her leaning against the wall, blood on her shoulder, and her breathing slow but steady, and he moved to her side, and checked the wound, and tore part of his sleeve to wrap it, and she led him without a word. The air was thin, and the comms were dead, and the exit was blocked, and the emergency signal was too weak to reach the sky. And Jack looked around and knew they were trapped for hours, maybe more, and maybe no one would find them before the air ran out. He sat down beside her and handed her water, and she took it, and their fingers touched for a moment, and it felt like the first real touch since the kiss that broke him, and he looked at her and said, You should not have come, but I am glad you did. She looked away and said, I did not ask for this, but maybe the stars did. For a while they sat in silence, with only the sound of machines humming in the walls, and their own quiet breaths, and Jack leaned his head back and closed his eyes, but could not sleep because every second with her was both heaven and pain. After some time she leaned toward him and whispered something in her language, and he asked what it meant, and she said it means forgive the fire, because it cannot help how it burns then. She touched his face and kissed him again. Not like before, not for greeting, not for duty, but for something she did not name, and he kissed her back with all the ache and hope he had tried to hide. When they pulled apart, she whispered, we should not do this, but her hand stayed in his, and her eyes did not lie. Jack smiled a little and said, maybe this dome is a gift, maybe this trap was meant to give us time without rules. But Rylesa shook her head and said time is not enough, if the world outside will not change. Still they stayed close, and spoke softly about stars and earth and dreams they had when they were young, and Jack laughed for the first time in days, and Rylesa smiled like a secret, and leaned her head on his shoulder. When the rescue team arrived, they broke through the wall with loud tools and bright lights and pulled them out. And Jack felt the cold air of freedom and the weight of reality return. Rylesa stood tall again, with her face blank and her hands behind her back, and she walked past the others without a word, and did not look at Jack again. But before they parted, she turned once and met his eyes, and in that look was everything they could not say, and Jack knew he would never forget that moment in the dark, when her kiss meant more than air, and more than escape, and more than life itself. Jack walked back into the base like a ghost, wearing a smile that did not belong to him, and eyes that held something no one could read, and every human who saw him nodded with respect, because word had spread that he survived a collapse and helped an alien diplomat return without injury, but no one knew what had really happened below the broken dome. He trained harder than before, and his hands became stronger and his back straighter and his focus sharper, and soon the engineers called him the fastest fixer on base, and the Virelians began to speak his name in meetings. But Jack did not care about the praise, or the titles, or the silent nods from superiors, because all he wanted was a look from her, and she had given him none since. The rescue Rylesa moved through the station like before with calm steps and unreadable eyes, and never once did she meet Jack in private or speak more than a few short words when they crossed paths in meetings, and every time she walked away, Jack felt a piece of him stay behind and bleed slowly. He spent long hours studying Virelian culture in the back corners of the station library, asking silent AI drones about traditions and energy bonds and emotion signs and what it meant whenever kissed without reason, and the answers always came back the same: uncertain, limited, cautious, and none of them satisfied his need to know what she truly felt. Some nights he sat alone with the translator orb and spoke his thoughts into it, just to hear them out loud, and one night he whispered, I think I would leave Earth forever, just to hear her say my name, the way she did under that dome, and the orb blinked and replied, this sentiment indicates attachment with high emotional weight. He joined a patrol team for dangerous runs beyond the shield line, where dust storms tore the skin from metal and strange beasts crawled from old tunnels, and he fought them with fire and steel and earned scars and more respect. But all he wanted was her voice, not medals and not cheers. She saw him once after a long mission with blood on his hands and dust in his eyes, and she paused for a second, as if to speak, but then turned away and walked into the shadows of the hall, and Jack leaned against the wall and laughed without joy, because even silence from her felt better than silence from the world. One day a message came to the command center calling for volunteers to visit an ancient Virelian temple far across the dunes, and Jack offered without asking about danger or distance, and when the team list returned, his name was first, and Rylesa's was second, and for a moment he felt both fear and fire in his chest. The mission began in silence, and she sat across from him in the crawler, with her hands folded and her face still, and Jack wanted to ask her why she had pulled away after the dome, and why she had kissed him with such fire, only to freeze again. But he said nothing, because her silence felt too heavy to break. The temple stood like a sleeping beast under the twin moons and the sand around. It glowed with strange light, and inside the walls hummed with memory and forgotten voices, and the team spread out to study the carvings, and Jack found himself alone with Rita in a hall full of silver glass that showed reflections, not of now, but of moments from the past. One panel flickered and showed her face near his from the dome moment, and Jack turned to her and asked, why did you pull away when you knew I would never leave you? And she looked at him and said, because I was afraid of what he asked, afraid of how much I wanted you, she said in a whisper that shook more than any wind, and Jack stepped closer, but she raised a hand and said, my people see love as weakness, and weakness brings danger, and if I choose you, I lose my place, and maybe you lose your world. Then let me choose it, he said quietly, let me choose you, even if it means losing everything. She looked into his eyes, and for a long time she said nothing, and then the floor shook with a sudden sound, and the team called for help, and the moment ended. like a dream broken by thunder, and they ran back to help the others, and the temple began to fall after they returned to base again. She said nothing and walked away again, and the others celebrated success and told stories of what they found, but Jack sat alone in the corner, with her voice still echoing in his chest. Because now he knew the truth she had tried to bury. She wanted him but feared what came with it, and he would not let go, not now, not ever. It began with a broadcast that was never meant to be seen, a moment caught by a hidden drone floating near the temple, a single stolen frame of her lips on his and his hands, on her face, and the fire between them clear and raw and real, and by the time they returned to base, the image had already reached 1,000 screens, and by morning it was on 1,000,000 more humans, whispered that love had bloomed across species. And some laughed and some cheered, but others did not laugh, and did not cheer, and did not forget that Rylessa was no ordinary alien, and Jack was no ordinary man. The Varelian High Council watched the clip in silence, and then burned every record of it from their public networks, but they could not erase the feelings it stirred in their people, and the fear it brought to those who hated change. Jack was called in first by Human Command, and asked if the kiss was real, and if the relationship was real, and if he understood what it meant, and Jack said yes again and again, without shame and without regret. Rylessa stood alone before her elders, with her back straight and her heart trembling as they demanded answers, and she gave none because no words could make them see what she felt when she looked at him, when she touched him, when she kissed him in the dark. Soon threats came from other systems, cold and sharp like blades, in the form of warnings and cancelled treaties and closed borders, and talk of weapons and walls, and whispers of betrayal and dishonor, and just like that, the peace they had built on sand began to shake. Rylessa was removed from her post, and her name was stripped from the official scrolls, and her family was called before the old voices and told to choose silence or exile, and she was given a choice, leave the human or leave her people, and for one full night she stood by the window in her empty chamber, and did not move. Meanwhile, Jack was attacked in the lower wing of the base by a masked figure who used a weapon banned by all known codes, and Jack fought back with broken fists, and rage in his chest, and blood in his mouth, and when the attacker fell and the mask came off, it was one of the new recruits. From Earth you made us look weak, the man said before passing out, and Jack stared at him, and saw not just a man, but a world that still feared what it did not understand. Later, Jack was told he would be sent home for his safety, and he said no, and locked himself in the repair bay where he worked without pause, trying to build something, anything that could help him reach her again. But Rylessa was gone. She had disappeared from the network, from the council, from every known signal, and the only sin left was a broken trace, picked up on a black channel near the edge of the border, where no one dared go unless they had nothing left to lose. Jack packed a small ship with supplies, and sent no message, and crossed the line into that space with nothing but her name on his lips, and a memory of her kiss burned into his chest, like a star that would never go dark. The patrol drones spotted him, and marked him as a trespasser, and alarms followed, and ships followed, and Jack pushed his engine until it screamed and his hull cracked, and still he flew, until he reached the signal's heart. There in the shadow of a shattered moon, was a station made of bone and steel, half working, half broken, and inside it sat Rylessa in armor that did not belong to her, cast her eyes harder, her voice lower, her face no longer calm, but burning. "You came," she said, with no surprise in her tone, and Jack said, "Of course I did. They're calling you a traitor," she said, and he answered, "I don't care. They're calling me worse," she said, and he answered, "I care about that." She looked at him with tired eyes, and for a long time said nothing, and then she stepped forward and kissed him. Again, not with fire this time, but with silence and sorrow and something like goodbye, but he did not let go. "I did not come here to lose you," he said. "I came to stand beside you." And when her hand finally closed around his, they both knew there was no turning back. Behind them, the system lit up with warning lights and enemy signals moved closer, and war was no longer just a whisper. It was here. But Jack held her hand, and she held his, and their hearts beat in rhythm, even as the stars around them began to burn. And for the first time in many cycles, two warriors stood, not for their races, not for their flags, not even for peace, but for love. A love born from a kiss, never meant to be seen, and now impossible to hide. The war never fully came, but it almost did, and some said it was the kiss that stopped it, and others said it was the kiss that started it. And no one could agree, but all remembered the human and the alien, who stood together at the edge of stars, and refused to step back. Jack and Rylessa were taken by a neutral faction before the enemy ships could strike, and placed under protection inside a sealed vessel far from any border, and watched by cameras and guarded by drones, and questioned again and again by leaders who wanted to know if what they had was love or just mistake. Either gave the answers they wanted, Jack said. I would die for her, and Rylesa said I would live beside him, and both answers were not protocol and not proper and not political, but they were true for weeks. They were held apart, and given cold rooms, and silent meals, and nothing to read, and no window to see the sky, and still. Jack counted every hour, until he would see her again, and still Rylesa marked her days by the sound of his name when the guards whispered. One morning the door to Jack's room opened without sound, and the soldier simply said follow, and Jack followed with his heart pounding like drums and his fists tight, and when the door at the end of the hall opened, he saw her standing there, in a plain robe with no rank and no symbol, and her eyes full of things he had never seen before. She walked to him without a word, and touched his cheek with a hand that shook and whispered, "My people said I must let you go to protect the future, but I told them you are my future." Jack reached for her and kissed her gently, and whispered back, "I am yours always, even if the stars fall later." They were brought before a new kind of council made of mixed races who wanted to test a new idea, not war, not silence, but unity, born from strange truth and shared hearts. And this time, Jack and Rylesa stood side by side. Without Rylesa told them, "I was trained to serve and obey and represent. But no one trained me for love, and no one warned me how strong it would be," Jack told them. "I came here to build bridges, not burn them, and if loving her is a crime, then make me the first criminal of peace." The council said nothing for a long time. And then one elder said, "Let them speak to the people directly, and show them what they really are. Not a story, not a scandal, but something real." And so the stage was built in orbit above a shared planet, and ships from across systems tuned in to watch. And many did not believe what they saw, even as the truth stared back at them. Jack stood under the soft lights in his old uniform with scars still healing, and fire still in his voice, and he said, "I never planned to love her, and she never asked for it, but the heart does not wait for permission, and the soul does not care about flags." Then Rylesa stepped forward in the same robe she wore the day they were reunited, and she looked into the lens with tears like stars in her eyes, and she said, "We kissed to greet, and to share, and to know another, but this human kissed me not as a greeting but as a promise, and now I understand what it means to feel it back." There was silence across many systems, and some hated and some hoped and some cried, and some simply watched again and again. Then Rylesa kissed Jack on the stage with no shame and no fear, and no need to hide, and the galaxy did not burn that day. Instead, something began to change, not fast, not easy, but slow, like dawn through thick fog, and one by one other voices rose, other hands reached out, other hearts spoke truths they had buried, and love became something no longer seen as weak or strange or wrong. Rylesa was offered a new role, not as a diplomat, not as a tool, but as a teacher of her people about emotions and choices, and Jack was given the chance to stay and build something bigger than machines. A home not just for humans, but for anyone who chose peace. They built that home together on the edge of 3 stars, and planted trees from her world, and grass from his, and wrote new codes in both languages, and watched new couples walk under new skies, without fear. And though the old ways never vanished, the old hearts learned slowly, and the future came one step at a time, not with guns, not with orders, but with a kiss that once meant nothing, and became everything, because love needs no translation, it only needs two who refuse to let go.